Thank you, Mr. Femi Boyede. Thank you, Kemi Amushan, and thank you, the management team of Talking Trade. Now, since we've used 15 minutes of the time, I will try to accelerate what I want to do. My intention is to take us like 15 minutes and give what I call my considered thoughts in terms of background. Hope that this will be as more interactive as possible.
Let me interject, sir. You actually have 30 minutes.
Well, I don't need that too much. I really don't. I think I'll spend more time with the Q&A so that there are so many issues we can deal with. But thank you very much for the 30 minutes. Maybe I'll take 20. But I think we should just go through those issues because there are quite a number of things that we may want to get through. By the way, by way of disclosure, my research topic at the Institute of Policy and Strategic Studies is actually the African Free Trade Agreement, with specific emphasis in looking at sectors which will be there. The research findings are just coming in and we haven't concluded it. Basically, it's something I take very seriously. And I can tell you honestly, some of the data are quite surprising to me. And even though I'm more comfortable with the Chatham House rules, I want to respect that the things I may say or avoid saying will be one out of decorum, not out of insincerity, as it may be. So thank you, gentlemen. Let me just quickly start with the introduction that in my field, I found out that intelligence is always what the market is thinking tomorrow, imagining, not find out what it sought. But in terms of governance, government always acts from memory. And the conversations around AfCFTA has always been around memory. It's more like when you talk about companies trying to do a change program. Everybody in the company changes except the board. And yet they are the ones that make decisions. And that's exactly what you find here in Nigeria. And I will try to quickly show you some of these things in a few minutes now. First is, let me just present my general thoughts. Also share some of how it affects the SMEs, which will be the later part of it, because the concept of SMEs itself will change as we go ahead in understanding what the AfCFTA is all about. Share some of my insights on my research findings and respond to comments as best as I can. So the first way is this. There's something about a conceptual understanding of AfCFTA that I still find very challenging. And it's always about modeling. The question is this: are we running a COMESA type model or an SADC model? And one of the two things is this: one, are you running off regional blocks that you have right now? Or is it just a 54 African country model? Because each of them has its own challenges. If you take a look at the evolution of Europe and everywhere where you have trade agreements, you either have a currency agreement, a common trade agreement, a free trade agreement, or we seem to have a potpourri. It's called, I think they call it a salad bowl approach, whereby nothing really may happen. It is this conceptual problem around AfCFTA and trade facilitation that I believe is going to be the major challenge, and I'll try to point it out in one or two ways. The sense for most of us is that this can work two ways. One, it can be a Marshal type plan, whereby we make quantum leaps and changes in policies, regulations, and practices in Nigeria, or we should just leave it more like a member-driven arrangement, which is going to be more of the same. And this is not a realistic approach to advancing continental integration. And my sense at this moment is that it is more or less like a member-driven arrangement. And it's about moving through the motion, with the exception of one or two things. Some countries in Africa seem to have broken the code. They have understood that we can use this trade to make better bargains for ourselves, like Ghana did with the European Union, or like Rwanda is doing in terms of positioning its company in anticipation of competition by changing rules and regulations that allows the country to be very competitive. This is almost more like common sense, really, not actual intelligence, really. Sometimes we make this thing sound like somebody has the best intelligence, but it's just common sense. We know how the international trade works, but every time we talk about AfCFTA, we are describing something that is not the same as what we used to do, but it's something that is yet to happen, and which means there are so many changes that would have to be made to understand fully well how do we address the input-output matrix. One of the most powerful things I have seen is that economic diplomacy becomes the new political edge in the Africa that we look at. Whether AfCFTA takes effect as it is conceived or not, each country must begin to understand that the game is that most countries are beginning to harmonize their political and economic objectives as one single one. They are not longer mutually exclusive. And therein lies the power of trade and understanding that an economy that wants to grow must focus on its own SMEs in such a way that he recalibrates them. Understanding, of course, that certain areas may be challenged, but that in terms of his risk profile, you understand that they'll be challenged over some time, but in certain areas, it will have a competitive advantage. And so it's not going to be like after we solve everybody's problem, but it would allow us to understand how we can compete. Now, if you take a look at the main problems around inter-African trade, really, it's basically around legal and regulatory costs. So you talk about the trade barriers and you talk about the non-trade barriers. And these are the issues around AfCFTA. At the end of the day, AfCFTA just comes back to taxes and tariffs. And how do we address these issues around these barriers and the new ones we are creating around it? But for those of us from Nigeria, here's a good and sad news. We had 58 years to plan for this. Nigeria was the first person to suggest a single African trade. And we went through it. In fact, the first other one, it was what most people refer to as the Lagos Plan of Action, was adopted in 1980. We went on all the way to 2019 when we finally signed. And the reason we signed was because we were truly not ready. Because anybody who have read through the rules of origin as contained in the phase 1 of the AfCFTA agreement would understand that Nigeria is not ready. And for 2 reasons. Nigeria at this point did not even have any trade or investment overarching strategy in place for us to operate with. In fact, I posit to say that Nigeria does not have a trade policy and industrial policy that articulates exactly what Nigeria's key goals and objectives are, that allows any embassy across Africa and in Europe to understand that this is Nigeria's best interest. And it is the absence of that philosophical position that should govern our development that makes it very difficult for us to keep on moving. And as you can see, if the goal around AfCFTA by 2031 is to have zero duty on 90% of tariff lines for countries in ECOWAS Customs Union, Ghana just signed an agreement with EU on the 80-20 rule. Well, let's just hope and see how it works. But I will try and explain some of these things in simple terms for you. So we all know what this AfCFTA is. The common thing they always talk about is the single market. And that's a very interesting one. Africa as a whole would have the largest in the world if it's able to get it right. But like you can see here, I am not so sure whether individual countries can be stopped from taking any action that protects their own interest, but does not sign up into that deal. And it is on that basis that I worry that this thing is fine on paper, but I'm not so sure that we can actually implement it. But for countries who understand their strategic interests, they will go through it. So I've always said pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So which type of suffering are we ready to avoid or to take? So I'm trying to just move too fast. Some of these things are not ready. Let me focus on these 3 issues. In my own experience and my own work, I've looked at these 3 major areas. I categorized them in my own way. As the first one, this with the old economy. That is trade as you know it, where people like Femi have built a whole stock of knowledge and base in there. The most critical things are in there for me are the rules of origin and procedures on the settlement of disputes. If you look at what happened with the closure of border in Cotonou and what have you, is that those Kampala agreements that were in place were never even followed through. So it made it easy for people to just ship vehicles into Cotonou, and it finds its way through Nigeria at the detriment of Nigeria. And it is because we are not able to enforce those rules. Those are the issues we are trying to resolve. And I can report honestly now that Nigeria seems to have addressed that up to about 97%. So maybe Nigeria would have been free from phase 1. But you see, phase 2 and phase 3 is what we call the new economy. And this is where the game changing for the Nigerian economy really lies. It is where most or some of us are spending most of our time rather than on the phase one. Phase one is the old order. Phase 2 and 3 will define the new order, for wherein we see that Nigeria also has competitive advantages, especially intellectual property rights and e-commerce. Unfortunately, our definition of intellectual property rights in Nigeria is still so far behind and archaic. And those legal instruments that we need to put in place, we haven't started the conversations. My friend Shuaibu Yauri, who is in charge of trademarks, has been working hard on this thing, but there seems not to be coherence in government's plan to make it. So if you have an SME who is in charge of products requiring IP rights in order to be able to trade, these are new areas of challenges we will have to deal with. And so, by way of summarizing my opening thoughts around this subject matter, is to say that every time you look at these two, look at this particular graph with you, and I keep on using it to explain the changing dynamics. Those were the companies in 1980 to 2010 that we felt we were writing agreements for. Most of those agreements we wrote may not be relevant for the companies you see here. Indeed, I dare say that it's even changed. If you take a look at it, let me go back again. If you look at between these 2 decades here, or 3 decades here, 1980 to 2010, look at the companies we are talking about, Eleganza, Peugeot. And so most of those agreements were written around those markets, those economies, those ways of conducting business. But if you take a look at the dominant companies in Nigeria today, and you look at them, the agreements we have in place would have to be, we have to rethink them in order to be able to allow these entities to thrive, because these entities reflect the future. And if you break it further down between 2010 and 2019, I can even break it further down, you begin to see that some of these companies are different. The companies that would dominate really will not have the same agreements and our concept of trade as we understood it here. And it will be different entirely. So again, for the purposes of the conversation we're having, it is always important to have the dichotomy between the old economy and the new economy. But the dominant companies you have here are such that the agreements we have in place would have to change. So many believe that Nigeria's dependence on oil has relative to its potentials in human capacity has been some of an issue. My own sense is this, that in this session, and that's why I was telling my dear host, Kemi, that it would be nice if I give my general thoughts and I can then go into specifics, which is also part of my slide presentation, is that we would have to address a few things. So let me start with a few things. There is a survey that came out, I think it's 2018. A new one is coming out, but it hasn't been finalized yet. But in this survey, it sampled 512 companies across the geographical zones of Nigeria, all the geopolitical zone. And in terms of the sample side, you have 70% are small-scale businesses, 20% are medium-scale businesses, 10% are large businesses. And these are the definitions we used, they used in the sample size. Well, here are the findings. 94% of the businesses in Nigeria are actually aware of ACTA and the signing of the agreement. The awareness is uniform across firms of sizes. 55% of the businesses believe Nigerian business environment is currently hostile, unsupported. Power, supply, taxes and tariffs, access to credit and road infrastructure are the top 4 challenges of the Nigerian business ecosystem. The sampled businesses believe that the top 3 advantages of ACTA is a better business environment, promotion of local businesses, and business expansion. Basically aspirational things, nothing concrete that can convert to money. The top 3 disadvantages of ACTA, however real, and they are real threats, they are the influx of substandard goods, which is already happening, the discouragement of local businesses, already happening, and the loss of revenue for Nigeria, which is happening on 2 fronts, both internal sabotage by itself and its inefficient system, and also by the fact that Nigeria loses money because the trade adjustment is skewed. The top 3 sources of uncertainty are possibilities that after we boost the economy. Well, again, this is just aspirational and it's not really operational. Another overall, 78% of the businesses believe that after we make a positive impact on local business, 10% believe that the impact will be negative, while 12% believe it will have no impact. The consensus among the researchers is that the benefits of ACTA for business and the economy depends on what and how each party handles the unique opportunities. So at this stage, I would say that you should permit me to change to my notes in form of this presentation, which may be helpful. But let me leave the screen on where it is right now so I can talk to you. Permit me just to change the screen so that I can.